The bullet grazed her cheek so close that Sarah Jennings felt the heat of it before the pain registered. And in that single moment, as she stumbled backward into the overturned wagon, she knew her life would never be the same. The summer of 1876 had been brutal in the Arizona Territory, and the raid on her family's homestead came without warning, a blur of gunfire and screaming that left her world shattered. She was 21 years old, newly married to Thomas Jennings for barely 6 months, and everything she had dreamed of building with him turned to ash and blood in less than an hour. The outlaws came at dawn when the sky was still pink and gold, seeking revenge against her husband for testifying against their leader in Tucson. Thomas had been a deputy, honest and true, and that honesty cost him everything. Sarah watched him die defending their home, watched the light leave his eyes as he fell in the dusty yard, and something inside her broke that would take years to mend. But it was what happened after, when the wagon caught fire and exploded, that marked her body as permanently as grief marked her soul. The explosion threw her 15 feet, and burning would rain down on her back and shoulders. She remembered the smell more than the pain at first, that sickening scent of her own flesh burning, and then the pain came in waves so intense she prayed for death. Their neighbor, old Sam Crawford, found her 3 hours later when he came to investigate the smoke. He carried her to his wagon, wrapped her in wet blankets, and drove like the devil himself was chasing them to the nearest town with a doctor. Doc Henderson did what he could, but medical knowledge in the Arizona Territory was limited, and burn treatment even more so. She spent 6 weeks in a room above the general store in Prescott, drifting in and out of fevered dreams, while her back slowly healed into a landscape of twisted, angry scars. The doctor told her she was lucky to be alive, but Sarah did not feel lucky. She felt marked, ruined, like something broken that could never be put back together properly. When she finally looked at her back in a mirror held up by the doctor's kind wife, Sarah wept for an hour. The scars ran from her shoulders down to her waist, raised and discolored, some white and some still pink and angry. They looked like melted wax, she thought, like something that had been beautiful once and then destroyed. She could not imagine anyone ever wanting to touch her again, could not imagine ever being whole. She stayed in Prescott for another month, working in the general store to pay off her medical debts. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, was kind and never asked her to do anything that required reaching high or straining her still tender back. But Sarah saw the pitying looks from customers, heard the whispers when people thought she could not hear. The young widow with the burned back. Poor thing, what will she do now? What she did was leave. She could not stay in Arizona, could not bear the memories or the ghost of Thomas that haunted every corner of the territory. She had an aunt in Colorado, her mother's sister Margaret, who ran a boarding house in a town called Silver Ridge. Sarah wrote to her, explained what had happened in the barest terms, and asked if she might come and help with the house. Margaret's response came within 3 weeks, warm and welcoming, telling Sarah she had a room waiting whenever she was ready. Sarah packed her few belongings in October of 1876, bought a seat on the stagecoach heading north, and left Arizona without looking back. The journey took 2 weeks, changing coaches 3 times, sleeping in way stations that ranged from merely uncomfortable to genuinely awful. But Sarah barely noticed. She was numb to everything except the constant ache in her back and the hollow feeling in her chest where her heart used to be. Silver Ridge sat in a valley surrounded by mountains that turned purple in the evening light, a town that had sprung up 5 years earlier when silver was discovered in the nearby hills. It was bigger than Sarah expected, with a main street that boasted 2 saloons, a hotel, a bank, a sheriff's office, 3 churches, and dozens of other businesses. Her aunt's boarding house stood on a quieter street 2 blocks from the center of town. A large 2-story building painted white with green shutters and a wide front porch. Margaret met her at the stagecoach office, a sturdy woman in her 50s with graying hair and her mother's kind eyes. She took one look at Sarah's thin frame and haunted expression and pulled her into a careful hug. "You are home now," she said simply. "Whatever you have been through, you are home." Sarah lived quietly in Silver Ridge through that first winter, helping her aunt run the boarding house, cooking and cleaning and changing linens. The house had 8 rooms for rent, and they were usually full with minors, merchants passing through, and the occasional family looking for more permanent lodging. Margaret asked nothing about Sarah's scars, though Sarah knew she must have noticed how carefully she moved, how she never wore anything that might reveal her back. The boarding house had a bathing room on the first floor, and Sarah only used it late at night when all the guests were asleep. She could not bear the thought of anyone seeing her undress, seeing the damage that marked her. She wore high-necked dresses in heavy fabrics, kept her hair long and loose down her back as if it might somehow hide what lay beneath her clothes. She spoke little, smiled less, and poured all her energy into work that left her too exhausted to dream. Spring came to Colorado in a rush of melting snow and wildflowers, and with it came new residents to Silver Ridge. The town was growing, becoming less of a rough mining camp and more of a proper town. New families arrived, new businesses opened, and among the newcomers was a cowboy named Jack Thornton who rode into town on a gray horse in late April of 1877 looking for work. Sarah first saw him from the boarding house kitchen window, leading his horse down the street with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. He was tall, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard on his strong jaw. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat that had seen better days, and there was something about the way he carried himself that made Sarah pause in her dishwashing to watch him pass. He stopped at the general store, then the saloon, then made his way to the livery stable where old Pete Thompson ran a business boarding horses and hiring out his services as a farrier. Sarah thought nothing more of it until 3 days later when Jack Thornton appeared at the boarding house door asking about a room. Margaret was out making calls, so Sarah answered his knock, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Up close, he was even taller than she had thought, and his eyes were a surprising shade of blue-green like shallow water over river stones. He removed his hat when he saw her, revealing hair that was indeed too long, curling slightly at his collar. "Good afternoon, miss," he said, and his voice was deep and courteous. "I am told this is the best boarding house in Silver Ridge and I am looking for a room. Would you have anything available?" Sarah kept her eyes down, focusing on the buttons of his shirt rather than his face. "We have 1 room left," she said quietly. "On the 2nd floor faces east. $3 a week includes breakfast and supper." "That sounds just fine," Jack said. "I have found work at the livery and the Rocking H Ranch, so I will be in town for a while. Name is Jack Thornton." "Sarah Jennings," she said automatically, then wished she had given a false name. She did not want to be known, did not want to be seen. "I will show you the room." She led him upstairs, very aware of his presence behind her, though he kept a respectful distance. The room was clean and simple, with a bed, a washstand, a small desk, and a chair. A window overlooked the street, and afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass. "This will do nicely," Jack said, setting his saddlebags on the bed. "Thank you, Mrs. Jennings." "Miss," Sarah corrected before she could stop herself, then felt her face flush. "I mean I am a widow, but you can call me Miss Jennings." Something shifted in Jack's expression, a softness entering his eyes. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "That must be a heavy burden for someone so young." Sarah nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and fled back downstairs to the safety of the kitchen. Her heart was pounding, though she could not say why. Maybe it was simply that Jack Thornton was the first man close to her own age who had spoken to her with such genuine kindness since Thomas died. Or maybe it was the way he looked at her, direct and honest, with no pity in his gaze. Jack proved to be an easy boarder, quiet and respectful, always on time for meals and never causing trouble. He worked long days at the livery and rode out to the Rocking H Ranch several times a week to help with their cattle and horses. Sarah learned from Pete Thompson, who sometimes came by the boarding house for Sunday supper, that Jack was one of the best horsemen he had ever seen, with a gift for training even the most difficult animals. "That boy has got patience like I have never witnessed," Pete said, accepting a second helping of roast chicken from Margaret. "Watched him work with a horse yesterday that 3 other men could not get near." Jack just stood there calm as you please, talking soft, and within an hour that horse was eating from his hand. It is a real gift. Sarah filed this information away without quite knowing why it mattered. She tried to avoid Jack when possible, serving his meals quickly and retreating to the kitchen, speaking only when necessary. But he made it difficult. He always thanked her for the food, always asked how her day was going, always treated her like a person rather than a piece of furniture. One evening in early May, Sarah was in the small garden behind the boarding house trying to plant tomatoes. Her back was aching from a long day of laundry, and she was having trouble bending to dig the holes without pain shooting through her scarred shoulders. She was kneeling in the dirt, gritting her teeth against the discomfort when a shadow fell across her work. "Pardon me, Miss Jennings," Jack's voice came from behind her, "but that looks like hard work for one person. Would you mind if I helped?" Sarah scrambled to her feet, instinctively pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the warm evening. "I can manage," she said stiffly. "I am sure you can," Jack agreed easily, "but there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered in friendship. I have got nothing else to do this evening, and I am pretty good with a garden. My mother taught me when I was a boy." There was something in his tone, gentle but not pitying, that made Sarah hesitate. She looked at him properly for the first time, really looked, and saw only honest kindness in his expression. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." They worked together in companionable silence, Jack digging the holes with strong, sure movements while Sarah planted the seedlings and patted soil around them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and birds sang in the cottonwood trees that bordered the property. It was peaceful in a way Sarah had not felt in months, and some of the tightness in her chest eased. "You have got a good hand with plants," Jack observed, sitting back on his heels to admire their work. "These should do well." "My mother taught me," Sarah said, echoing his earlier words. "Before she died when I was 15, she said a garden was a way of putting hope in the ground and watching it grow." "That is a beautiful way to think of it," Jack said softly. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Sarah agreed, and felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. She had not talked about her mother in years, had locked away all those memories with everything else that hurt too much to remember. They finished planting as the light faded, and Jack helped her carry the tools back to the small shed. As they walked back toward the house, he said casually, "I lost my father 2 years ago. Cattle stampede. It happened so fast he probably never knew what hit him, but it like to killed my mother with grief. I think that is why I left Texas, to be honest. Too many ghosts." Sarah stopped walking and looked at him in surprise. "You are from Texas?" "Born and raised near Austin," Jack confirmed. "Worked on my family's ranch until Pa died and Ma sold the place. She is living with my sister now in San Antonio, and I decided it was time to see what else the world had to offer. Landed here and found I liked the look of the mountains." "The mountains are beautiful," Sarah agreed quietly. "I am from Arizona originally." "I have never been there," Jack said. "What brought you to Colorado?" The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her walls slam back up. "Family," she said shortly. "My aunt needed help with the boarding house." If Jack noticed her withdrawal, he did not comment on it. "Well, Silver Ridge is lucky to have you," he said easily. "That was the best fried chicken I have ever eaten, and I have eaten a lot of fried chicken in my time." Despite herself, Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Aunt Margaret's recipe," she said. "I just follow her instructions." "Then you follow them very well," Jack replied. He tipped his hat to her as they reached the back door. "Thank you for letting me help with the garden, Miss Jennings. I enjoyed the company." He disappeared inside before Sarah could respond, leaving her standing in the gathering darkness feeling oddly unsettled. She could not remember the last time someone had sought out her company, had treated her like she was something more than just damaged goods. It was disconcerting and somehow terrifying because she knew that if Jack Thornton ever saw what lay beneath her proper dresses, he would look at her the way everyone else did, with pity, with revulsion. Over the following weeks, Jack continued to be friendly in his quiet, unassuming way. He helped Margaret repair the front porch steps, fixed a leaky pipe in the kitchen, and could often be found in the garden in the evenings tending to the plants. Sarah tried to maintain her distance, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. Jack simply wore down her defenses through sheer persistence and genuine kindness. She learned that he had 2 sisters, both younger, and that he sent money home to his mother every month. She learned that he loved horses more than anything, that he could play the harmonica passably well, and that he had a dry sense of humor that sometimes caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he drank coffee black, preferred his eggs over easy, and always ate everything on his plate without complaint, and Jack in turn learned about her. Small things at first, details she let slip in unguarded moments, that she loved to read but rarely had time for it. That she missed the desert sometimes despite everything that had happened there. That she had wanted children once back when she was married, but that dream had died along with her husband. June arrived with warm days and cool nights, and Silver Ridge hummed with activity. The mines were producing well, the cattle drives were starting, and the town felt alive with possibility. Margaret's boarding house stayed full, and Sarah worked from dawn until late in the evening, cooking and cleaning and managing the constant demands of 8 boarders. It was on a particularly hot Tuesday when everything changed. Sarah was in the kitchen making bread, her arms deep in flour, when she reached up to wipe sweat from her forehead. The motion pulled at her dress, and she felt something tear along the back seam. She froze, her heart suddenly pounding, and carefully set down the dough. The tear was not large, but it was right across her shoulders, exactly where the worst of her scars were. She could not sew it while wearing the dress, and she could not take it off where someone might see her. Margaret was out making deliveries, and most of the boarders were at work, but Jack had mentioned he might come back midday to shoe a horse Pete was bringing by. Sarah hurried upstairs to her small room on the 2nd floor, praying she would not encounter anyone on the way. She made it to her room without incident and locked the door behind her. She had another dress, thankfully, a gray one that was getting worn but was still serviceable. She quickly stripped off the torn dress, shivering despite the warmth of the day, very aware of her exposed back. She had just reached for the gray dress when she heard footsteps in the hallway and then a knock on her door. "Miss Jennings," Jack's voice came through the wood. "Your aunt asked me to let you know that Mrs. Patterson is here with a delivery. She has got some kind of special order for the pantry." Sarah's hands shook as she grabbed the gray dress and tried to pull it over her head. "Thank you," she called out, her voice strained. "I will be down in a moment." "Are you all right?" Jack asked, concern evident in his tone. "You sound upset." "I am fine," Sarah insisted, struggling with the buttons that ran down the back of the dress. They were impossible to reach, especially with her limited flexibility from the scar tissue, and she felt panic rising in her throat. She could not go downstairs in her chemise, but she could not fasten the dress either. "Miss Jennings, I can hear you struggling in there," Jack said gently. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "No," Sarah said, hating how close to tears she sounded. "Just tell Mrs. Patterson I will be down shortly." There was a long pause, and then Jack said softly, "Sarah, please, let me help. Whatever is wrong, I promise you it is nothing to be ashamed of." The use of her first name, the genuine worry in his voice, broke something inside her. Sarah walked to the door on shaking legs and slowly unlocked it. She opened it just wide enough for Jack to see her face, the dress clutched to her chest. "I tore my other dress," she said in barely a whisper. I cannot reach the buttons on this one. Jack's eyes searched her face and she saw understanding dawn. Turn around, he said simply. I will button it for you. No, Sarah said immediately, taking a step back. You do not understand. Then help me understand, Jack said, his voice infinitely patient. Please, Sarah, let me help you. She looked at him standing in the doorway, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness for 2 months, and she made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. She turned around slowly, letting the dress fall open to reveal her chemise and the landscape of scars that covered her back. She heard Jack's sharp intake of breath, and she closed her eyes, waiting for the revulsion, the pity, the inevitable retreat. Instead, she felt his fingers, gentle as a whisper, touch the edge of the worst scar near her left shoulder blade. Who did this to you? He asked, and his voice was rough with emotion. It was not a person, Sarah said, her words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. It was a fire, an explosion. Outlaws attacked our homestead in Arizona, killed my husband, and the wagon exploded. I was caught in it. This is what is left. Jack was silent for a long moment, and Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Then his fingers moved again, tracing the path of another scar and another with a tenderness that made her breath catch. I am hideous, she whispered. I know what people see when they look at these. I know what you must be thinking. Do you? Jack asked quietly. Do you know that I am thinking you are the strongest person I have ever met, that these scars tell a story of survival, of someone who fought through hell and came out the other side? That I am wondering how anyone could look at you and see anything but beautiful? Sarah turned around to face him, shocked, and found him looking at her with such warmth in his eyes that it stole her breath. You cannot mean that, she said. I have never meant anything more in my life, Jack replied. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. Sarah, I have been trying to find the courage to tell you how I feel for weeks now. I know you have been hurt, I know you have lost so much, but I need you to know that when I look at you, I see someone remarkable. These scars do not make you ugly. Nothing could make you ugly. My scars make me ugly, she said, the words she had repeated to herself 1,000 times in the past year. Everyone thinks so, everyone pities me. Then everyone is a fool, Jack said firmly. He moved closer and Sarah found herself unable to step away. May I? He asked, gesturing to her back. Sarah did not trust herself to speak, so she just nodded. Jack moved behind her again, and she felt him gather her long hair and gently drape it over her shoulder, exposing her back completely. Then she felt his lips, soft and warm, press against the worst of her scars, the one that ran from her shoulder blade down to her mid-back. She gasped at the sensation, at the tenderness of it, and felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. Jack kissed another scar and another, methodically covering every inch of damaged skin with gentle reverence. His hands came up to rest lightly on her shoulders, and Sarah realized she was shaking. These are part of you, Jack murmured against her skin. Part of your story. And your story is beautiful, Sarah, all of it. The joy and the sorrow, the love and the loss, you are beautiful. Sarah turned in his arms, not caring that her dress was still open, not caring about anything except the need to see his face, to know if what she heard in his voice was real. Jack was looking at her like she was something precious, something to be treasured, and the last of her walls crumbled to dust. I am so scared, she whispered, scared of being hurt again, scared of letting anyone close. I know, Jack said, cupping her face in his hands. I am scared too. But I think you are worth being scared for. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Sarah felt something inside her chest that she thought had died forever flicker back to life. Hope. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. Let me court you properly, he said. Let me show you that you deserve to be loved, scars and all. Sarah took a shaky breath and nodded, unable to form words around the emotion clogging her throat. Jack smiled, that slow, warm smile she had seen him give to nervous horses, and carefully helped her into her dress. His fingers were deft with the buttons, and when he finished, he pressed one more kiss to the back of her neck, right above the collar. Now, he said, his voice lighter. "Shall we go see what Mrs. Patterson has delivered?" Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her, and together they went downstairs to face the world. Mrs. Patterson took one look at Sarah's flushed face and Jack's gentle expression, and raised her eyebrows knowingly. But she said nothing except to comment on the excellent quality of the preserves she had brought. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Sarah had experienced, even in her first marriage. Thomas had been kind, but their courtship had been practical, two young people making a sensible match in a harsh land. What grew between her and Jack was something entirely different, deeper and more profound. He courted her with a patience and attentiveness that left her breathless, as if he was gentling a wild creature rather than winning a woman's heart. They took walks in the evening after supper, Jack offering his arm and pointing out constellations in the clear mountain sky. They sat together on the porch swing Margaret had installed, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods and dreams for the future. Jack brought her wildflowers from the meadows near the ranch, armfuls of columbine and Indian paintbrush that Sarah arranged in jars throughout the boarding house. He also made sure she knew, without question, that her scars did not repel him. One warm July evening, they were alone in the garden, and Jack asked if he could see her back again. Sarah hesitated only a moment before leading him into the small shed where the garden tools were kept. In the privacy of that dim space, she unbuttoned the back of her dress and let it fall to her waist, exposing her chemise and the scars above it. Jack traced each one with his fingertips, learning the map of her survival, and then he kissed them again, one by one, with such reverence that Sarah found herself crying. "You are a miracle," he whispered against her skin. "Do you know that? You survived something that should have killed you, and you are still here, still strong, still so incredibly alive." Sarah turned and kissed him with a passion that surprised them both, pouring all her gratitude and growing love into the contact. Jack responded in kind, his arms coming around her carefully, always mindful of her tender places. They stayed in the shed until the light faded completely, holding each other, and Sarah felt more whole than she had in years. August brought a heat wave to Silver Ridge, temperatures soaring into the high 90s day after day. The boarding house was stifling, even with all the windows open, and tempers grew short. It was on one of these scorching afternoons that trouble arrived in the form of 3 men on dusty horses. Sarah was in the kitchen making lemonade when she heard raised voices from the street. She looked out the window and saw the men dismounting in front of the boarding house, all 3 wearing guns low on their hips in the manner of men who knew how to use them. Something about the way they moved, predatory and confident, made her stomach clench with fear. Margaret was upstairs changing linens, and most of the boarders were at work. Only old Mr. Henderson, who was recovering from a broken leg, and Jack, who had the afternoon off, were home. Sarah heard the front door open and the heavy tread of boots in the hallway. She set down the pitcher she was holding and moved to the kitchen door, peering out carefully. The 3 men stood in the parlor, looking around with expressions that made Sarah's skin crawl. The leader, a big man with a scarred face and cold eyes, called out, "Anyone home? We are looking for a place to stay." Sarah stepped out, keeping her face neutral. "We are full at present," she said, proud that her voice did not shake. "You might try the hotel on Main Street." The leader's gaze fixed on her, and Sarah saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "Well now," he said slowly, "I know you. You are Tom Jennings' widow, are you not? From down Arizona way." Ice flooded Sarah's veins. She knew this man now, recognized him from the trial, from the nightmares that still plagued her. His name was Bill Cutter, and he had ridden with the gang that killed Thomas. "You are mistaken," she said, taking a step back toward the kitchen. "I do not think so," Cutter said, advancing. "Tommy Boy testified against my brother, got him hanged. I figure his widow owes us something for that." The other 2 men spread out, blocking the exits, and Sarah felt panic rising. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs, and Jack appeared, his eyes taking in the situation immediately. He moved to stand beside Sarah, his presence solid and reassuring. "The lady said we are full," Jack said calmly. "Time for you gentlemen to move along." Cutter laughed, an ugly sound. "This is not your business, Cowboy. This is between me and the widow." "Anything involving Miss Jennings is my business," Jack replied, his hand resting on the gun he wore at his hip. Sarah had rarely seen him wear it, but she was grateful for it now. "Now you have got two choices. You can leave peacefully or you can deal with the sheriff. Your call." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut, and for a long moment Sarah thought they might actually draw on Jack. Then Cutter spat on the floor and sneered. "This is not over, widow. You and me, we have got unfinished business." "The only business you have is with the law," Jack said steadily. "And I am fairly certain there are warrants out on all three of you. Sheriff Brennan is going to be very interested to hear you are in town." That got their attention. The three men exchanged glances, and then Cutter nodded sharply to his companions. "Let us go," he growled. "This town is not worth the trouble." They left in a cloud of dust and muttered threats, and Sarah sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. Jack holstered his gun and turned to her, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "They killed Thomas," Sarah whispered. "That man, Bill Cutter, he was there. I recognized him from the trial. He was one of the gang." Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "He cannot hurt you now," he said fiercely. "I promise you, Sarah, I will not let anyone hurt you." Margaret came thundering down the stairs, having heard the commotion, and Jack quickly explained what had happened. Margaret immediately sent for Sheriff Brennan, who arrived within the hour with 2 deputies. He took statements from Sarah and Jack, nodded grimly when Sarah identified Cutter, and promised to send telegrams to the marshals in Arizona. "Those boys have been making trouble from here to Texas," Brennan said. "If they are still in the area, we will find them. In the meantime, I will have a deputy watch the boarding house for a few days, just to be safe." True to his word, a deputy was stationed outside the boarding house that evening and the next day. But Cutter and his men had vanished, likely spooked by the mention of warrants. Sarah tried to go about her normal routine, but she was jumpy, startling at every sound. Jack stayed close, and at night he slept in a chair outside her bedroom door, refusing to leave her unprotected. On the 3rd day, Sheriff Brennan came by with news. "Got word from Arizona," he said. "Bill Cutter and his gang are wanted for murder, robbery, and a host of other crimes. There is a substantial reward for information leading to their capture. We have got men out looking, but they have likely moved on to easier territory." "So Sarah is safe?" Jack asked, his arm around her shoulders. "As safe as anyone can be in this country," Brennan replied. "But I would stay vigilant. Cutter has a reputation for holding grudges." The incident left Sarah shaken, bringing back memories she had tried to bury. She had nightmares again, waking up screaming from dreams of fire and gunshots. Jack was always there, holding her, talking her through the panic, reminding her that she was safe, that he was not going anywhere. One night, after a particularly bad dream, Sarah found herself in Jack's arms in the hallway outside her room, sobbing against his chest. "I thought I was past this," she choked out. "I thought I was healing." "Healing is not a straight line," Jack said gently, stroking her hair. "You take 2 steps forward and 1 step back sometimes, but you are still moving forward, Sarah. You are still here, still fighting. That is what matters." "I do not feel strong," she whispered. "I feel broken." Jack pulled back enough to look into her eyes, his expression fierce. "You are the strongest person I know," he said. "You survived something that would have destroyed most people. You built a new life when everything was taken from you. You opened your heart to me even though you were terrified. That is not broken, Sarah. That is brave beyond measure." She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and love and desperate need into it. Jack responded with equal fervor, and they stood in the hallway holding each other, until the first light of dawn crept through the windows. September brought cooler weather, and the aspen trees turned gold on the mountainsides. Silver Ridge prepared for the winter ahead, and life settled back into a comfortable rhythm. Jack continued to work at the livery and the Rocking H Ranch, saving money with a purpose he had not yet shared with Sarah. They spent every possible moment together, and everyone in town knew they were courting. Some of the older ladies clucked their tongues about propriety, but most people were happy to see the sad young widow smiling again. It was on a Sunday in late September when Jack asked Sarah to go for a ride with him. He borrowed a gentle mare from Pete and helped Sarah into the saddle, then mounted his gray horse and led them out of town toward the mountains. They rode for about an hour, following a trail through stands of golden aspen and dark green pine, until they came to a meadow that overlooked the entire valley. Jack helped Sarah dismount and spread a blanket on the ground. They sat together, sharing the lunch Sarah had packed, and looked out over Silver Ridge far below. The town looked tiny from this height, a collection of buildings and roads carved out of the wilderness. "I have been thinking," Jack said after a while, his hand covering Sarah's, "about the future. About what I want my life to look like." Sarah's heart started beating faster. "And what do you want?" she asked. Jack turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want a ranch of my own someday. Nothing huge, just a few hundred acres where I can raise horses and cattle. I want a house with a big kitchen and a garden, and a barn with room for all the animals I will train. I want a family, children running around and making noise. I want all the things I lost when my father died and we sold our place in Texas." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said softly. "You will make a fine rancher." "I will," Jack agreed. "But the thing is, Sarah, none of that means anything if I do not have the right person to share it with. I have been saving money, working extra hours, because I want to buy some land near here. And I want to build that house, plant that garden, fill that barn, but I want to do it with you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards," he said. "And I know you have been hurt, that you have every reason to be cautious. But Sarah, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your smile that is still a little shy even now. I love how you hum when you garden and how you always save the last biscuit for whoever is still hungry. I love every single thing about you, including every scar, because they are part of what made you who you are." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, but she was smiling wider than she had in years. "Jack," she whispered. "I am not asking you to forget Thomas," Jack continued. "He was part of your life and he made you who you are too. I am just asking you to let me be part of your future. Marry me, Sarah, build a life with me. Let me spend every day showing you how precious you are." "Yes," Sarah said, the word bursting out of her. "Yes, Jack, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, and they held each other on that mountain meadow as the aspen leaves danced in the wind and the sun shone down warm and bright. Sarah felt a joy so pure and complete that it washed away years of pain and fear. She was not broken. She was not ruined. She was loved, scars and all, by a man who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. They rode back to town in the afternoon light, and Sarah could not stop looking at the ring on her finger, this symbol of promises and new beginnings. Margaret cried when they told her the news and immediately started planning the wedding. The other boarders offered congratulations, and Pete Thompson insisted on providing a horse and buggy for the couple. They were married on the first Saturday in October of 1877, in a small ceremony at the church with half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that Margaret had helped her sew, with a high back that covered her scars but felt less like armor and more like a choice. Jack wore a new suit that Pete had insisted on buying him as a wedding gift, and he looked so handsome that Sarah felt her heart swell with love. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack kissed Sarah with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. Afterward, there was a celebration at the boarding house, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Sarah laughed more in those few hours than she had in the entire past year, surrounded by friends and family, and the man she loved. As evening fell and the guests began to leave, Jack led Sarah upstairs to the room they would share, at least until they could build their own house. He closed the door behind them and pulled her into his arms, just holding her for a long moment. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Sarah replied honestly. "Thank you, Jack, for seeing me, for loving me." "Always," he promised. Then, with gentle hands, he began to unbutton her dress. Sarah felt a moment of old fear, old shame, but it melted away under Jack's loving gaze. He removed her dress carefully, then her chemise, until she stood before him in just her drawers, her scarred back fully exposed. Jack traced the scars with his fingers, then his lips, kissing each one as he had that first time. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "You are so beautiful, Sarah Thornton." The new name sent a thrill through her, a reminder that she was starting fresh, that the past did not have to define her future. She turned and helped Jack out of his own clothes, learning the landscape of his body as he had learned hers. They came together with a passion and tenderness that left them both breathless, and afterward they lay tangled in the sheets, talking softly and making plans for their future. Jack had already found a parcel of land, he told her, about 5 miles from town. It had a creek running through it, good grass for cattle, and enough trees to provide shelter and timber. He had been saving every penny, and with the money Sarah had saved from her work at the boarding house, they had almost enough to buy it outright. They could start building in the spring, he said, and move into their own place by summer. "What should we call it?" Sarah asked, her head on Jack's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What do you mean?" Jack asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "The ranch," Sarah clarified. "It needs a name." Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking, "What about the Rising Sun Ranch?" he suggested. "Because you are my new beginning, my sunrise after the darkness." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again, but they were happy tears. "I love it," she said. The Rising Sun Ranch. They spent the next months planning and dreaming, working extra hours to save money. Jack took on more work at the Rocking H, learning everything he could about running a successful ranch. Sarah continued to help Margaret, but also started planning the garden she would plant at their new home, the kitchen she would set up, all the details that would make a house a home. Winter came to Colorado with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled in drifts taller than a man and temperatures that froze the river solid. But Sarah was warm and happy, wrapped in Jack's love and the promise of spring. They spent the long winter evenings reading together, playing cards with the other boarders and dreaming of the future. It was in January of 1878, on a particularly cold night, when Sarah realized she might be pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses twice now, and she felt different, a certain tenderness and fatigue that she remembered from conversations with married women. She said nothing to Jack at first, wanting to be sure, but by February she was certain. She told him on Valentine's Day, a holiday he had shyly admitted he wanted to celebrate. She had baked his favorite apple pie, and as they sat together after supper, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I have a gift for you," she said softly. "But it will not be ready until August." Jack looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned on his face like the sun breaking through clouds. "Sarah," he breathed. "Are you saying what I think you are saying? We are going to have a baby," Sarah confirmed, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to be a father." Jack let out a whoop of joy that brought Margaret running from the kitchen, thinking something was wrong. When they explained, Margaret burst into happy tears and hugged them both. The other boarders offered congratulations, and Pete insisted on buying drinks for everyone at the saloon to celebrate. Jack was beside himself with happiness, talking constantly about the baby, about preparing the ranch, about making sure everything was perfect. He became even more protective of Sarah, if that was possible, insisting she rest more and not lift anything heavy. Sarah found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure, but she could not deny that she loved being cared for so thoroughly. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and new growth, and in April, Jack finalized the purchase of their land. They spent every spare moment at the property, planning where to build the house, where to put the barn, where the garden would go. Jack hired 2 men from town to help with the building, and by May, the frame of the house was starting to take shape. It was a simple design: 2 stories with 4 bedrooms upstairs and a large kitchen, parlor, and dining room downstairs. There would be a wide porch across the front, perfect for sitting and watching the sunset, and big windows to let in light. Sarah walked through the skeletal structure, imagining furniture and curtains, picturing their child playing on the floor, and felt such profound gratitude that it nearly overwhelmed her. They moved into the house in July, though it was not quite finished. The bedrooms were done, and the kitchen, which was all they really needed. Jack built furniture in the evenings, rough but serviceable pieces that would do until they could afford better. Sarah sewed curtains and quilts, preparing for the baby that grew inside her with each passing day. Her pregnancy was easy, all things considered. She felt tired and her back ached, but Doc Henderson assured her this was normal. The scars on her back had stretched and faded somewhat, becoming less angry, and Jack kissed them every night, telling her how beautiful she was, how proud he was of her strength. On a hot August afternoon, Sarah's labor began. Jack rode like the wind to fetch Doc Henderson and Margaret, then paced the downstairs of their house like a caged animal while Sarah labored upstairs. The birth was long and difficult, Sarah's scarred back making it hard for her to find comfortable positions, but Doc Henderson was experienced and kind. Margaret held her hand and wiped her forehead, and after 14 hours of labor, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Daniel Thornton, Thomas after Sarah's first husband and Daniel after Jack's father. When Jack held his son for the first time, tears streamed down his face, and Sarah felt her heart might burst with love for both of them. "He is perfect," Jack whispered, studying the tiny face with wonder. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." "Just like his father," Sarah said, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. The first months with baby Thomas were exhausting and wonderful. He was a good baby, sleeping in long stretches and eating well, and Jack was a devoted father. He got up in the night to bring Thomas to Sarah for feeding, changed diapers without complaint, and could often be found simply holding his son and staring at him in amazement. The ranch was thriving too. Jack had bought a small herd of cattle and several horses, and he was starting to build a reputation as a talented horse trainer. People came from surrounding towns to have Jack work with their difficult horses, and the money was steady and good. Sarah kept the house and tended her garden, which was producing more vegetables than they could possibly eat. She canned and preserved, preparing for the winter ahead. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. They had friends in town, attended church on Sundays, and hosted dinners at the ranch. Sarah became close with several other young mothers, sharing advice and commiserating about sleepless nights. She had not realized how isolated she had been in her grief and shame until she opened herself up to friendship again. It was in the spring of 1879, when Thomas was 9 months old and toddling around getting into everything, that Bill Cutter returned to Silver Ridge. Sarah was in town with Margaret, shopping for supplies, when she saw him standing across the street, watching her with cold eyes. She froze, terror flooding her veins, and Margaret followed her gaze. "Get to the sheriff," Margaret said urgently. "I will stay with the baby." But before Sarah could move, Cutter started across the street toward them. Sarah grabbed Thomas from Margaret's arms and backed toward the general store, her heart pounding. Then she heard hoofbeats, and Jack came around the corner on his gray horse, moving fast. He had been at the bank, but somehow he had seen what was happening. Jack dismounted in one fluid motion and put himself between Sarah and Cutter. "You have got a lot of nerve showing your face here," he said, his voice deadly calm. "There is still a warrant out for your arrest." "I have come for what I am owed," Cutter growled. That woman's husband cost me my brother. I figure she owes me blood. The only blood owed here is yours, Jack replied. By now, several other men had gathered, including Sheriff Brennan and his deputies. You killed an innocent man and destroyed a family. Your brother got what he deserved. Cutter's hand moved toward his gun, and everything happened very fast. Jack drew faster than Sarah had ever seen anyone move, his gun clearing leather in a blur. The shot echoed through the street and Cutter fell, clutching his shoulder. The deputies swarmed him immediately, disarming him and binding his hands. That was for Sarah, Jack said coldly, holstering his weapon. And for her first husband and for every other person your gang hurt. Sheriff Brennan nodded approvingly. Good shooting, Jack. Shoulder wound, nice and clean. He will live to stand trial. He looked at Cutter, who was groaning on the ground. Bill Cutter, you are under arrest for murder, attempted murder, and about a dozen other charges. You are going to hang just like your brother. They took Cutter away, and Jack immediately turned to Sarah, who was shaking violently, holding Thomas tight. He wrapped his arms around both of them, creating a protective cocoon. It is over, he said into her hair. He cannot hurt you anymore. It is over, Sarah. And it was. Cutter was tried, found guilty, and hanged within 2 months. The remaining members of his gang were hunted down and brought to justice. The chapter of Sarah's life that included fire and loss and terror was finally, definitively closed. The years that followed were good ones. The Rising Sun Ranch grew and prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for the quality of Jack's horses. They had 3 more children, a daughter named Margaret Rose in 1881, another son named Samuel in 1883, and finally a daughter named Lily in 1886. Their house rang with laughter and noise, and the garden Sarah had dreamed of flourished. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading and helping his father with the horses. Margaret Rose, named for Sarah's aunt who passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1882, was a spitfire who climbed trees and rode like the wind. Samuel was gentle and kind, always bringing home injured animals for his mother to nurse. And Lily, the baby, was sweet and loving, with Jack's blue-green eyes and Sarah's determination. Sarah never forgot Thomas Jennings, her first husband, but the grief faded to a gentle melancholy, a remembrance rather than a wound. She told her children about him sometimes, about his courage and his kindness, and they accepted that their mother had loved before she loved their father. Jack never showed anything but respect for Sarah's past, understanding that it was part of what shaped the woman he loved. The scars on Sarah's back faded with time, becoming white lines that were barely noticeable. She no longer hid them, no longer felt shame. On summer days, when it was too hot to bear, she wore lighter dresses with lower backs, and if anyone noticed the scars, they said nothing. She was Mrs. Thornton, successful rancher's wife and beloved mother, and the scars were just part of her story. It was on their 10th wedding anniversary, in October of 1887, that Jack took Sarah back to the meadow where he had proposed. They rode together on his gray horse, now older and slower but still reliable, leaving the children in the capable hands of Jack's mother, who had moved to Silver Ridge 2 years earlier to be near her grandchildren. They spread a blanket in the same spot and looked out over the valley, which had grown in the decades since that first proposal. More houses, more roads, more people making lives in this beautiful place. But the mountains were the same, eternal and unchanging, and the aspen trees still turned gold in the fall. Do you remember what I said here 10 years ago? Jack asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Every word, Sarah replied. You told me you wanted a ranch, a house, a garden, a family. You told me you loved me, scars and all. I still do, Jack said softly. Love you, I mean. More than I did then, which I did not think was possible. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and more. You have made me the happiest man alive. I love you too, Sarah said, leaning into his warmth. You saved me, Jack, not just from Cutter or from danger, but from myself, from my shame and my fear. You taught me that I was worth loving. You were always worth loving, Jack corrected gently. I just helped you see it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their valley, over their ranch and their life. Sarah thought about the girl she had been, young and innocent and in love with Thomas. She thought about the broken woman she had become after the fire, hiding her scars and her heart. And she thought about the woman she was now, strong and loved and complete. "My scars make me ugly," she had said once, turning away in shame. But Jack had turned her back and kissed each one, showing her a different truth. Her scars made her strong. They made her a survivor. They made her who she was, the woman Jack Thornton loved with his whole heart. And as the sun dipped below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah Thornton knew with absolute certainty that she was home. Not just in this place, though she loved the valley and the ranch and the house they had built together. But home in Jack's arms, home in his love, home in the life they had created from loss and pain and hope. Their children grew up strong and capable on the Rising Sun Ranch. Thomas became a lawyer, moving to Denver but visiting often with his wife and children. Margaret Rose married a rancher from a neighboring property, combining their lands and creating one of the most successful operations in the territory. Samuel took over the horse training business from his father, with a gift that surpassed even Jack's considerable talent. And Lily became a teacher, educating the children of Silver Ridge and the surrounding area. Jack and Sarah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, welcomed grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and watched Silver Ridge transform from a rough mining town to a thriving city. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other, partners in every sense of the word. On cool evenings, they would sit on the porch they had dreamed of, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Jack would hold Sarah's hand, his thumb tracing the familiar lines of her palm, and they would talk about their day, their children, their memories. Sometimes Jack would kiss her scarred back, a habit he had never broken, reminding her without words that she was beautiful, that she was loved, that her scars were badges of honor rather than marks of shame. When Jack passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, having lived a long and fulfilling life, Sarah grieved deeply but without regret. They had been married for 46 years, had built a life and a legacy that would last for generations. She buried him in the meadow where he had proposed, where they had returned so many times over the years, and planted an aspen tree over his grave. Sarah lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still active and engaged with life. She told stories of the old days, of the Wild West that was rapidly disappearing, of the man who had loved her scars and all. And when she passed, also peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, she was buried beside Jack in that meadow, 2 aspen trees marking their resting place. Their descendants still run the Rising Sun Ranch, now one of the oldest continuously operating ranches in Colorado. The original house still stands, expanded and modernized but fundamentally the same. And in the family Bible, carefully preserved, is the story of Jack and Sarah Thornton, written in Sarah's own hand. It tells of loss and survival, of shame transformed into strength, of a man who saw beauty where others saw only damage. It tells of a love that healed wounds deeper than fire could reach, of a partnership that built something lasting and good. And it ends with a simple sentence, written in Sarah's careful script. "He loved my scars and in doing so taught me to love myself." That story has been passed down through generations, a reminder that we are more than our wounds, that true love sees beyond surface damage to the strength beneath. It is a story of the Wild West, of hard times and harder choices, but ultimately it is a story of hope. Of second chances and new beginnings. Of the transformative power of someone seeing you, truly seeing you, and loving what they find. The meadow where Jack and Sarah are buried is a place of pilgrimage now for their descendants, who come to pay respects and remember the couple who started it all. The aspen trees have grown tall and strong, their leaves turning gold every fall like they did when Jack first proposed in that spot. And on quiet evenings, when the wind rustles through the leaves and the sun sets over the mountains, some swear they can hear laughter, the sound of two people so deeply in love that not even death could separate them. The Rising Sun Ranch continues to thrive, a testament to Jack and Sarah's vision and hard work. The horses they bred have become legendary in the region, known for their intelligence and temperament. The land they purchased and improved has remained in the family, carefully stewarded by each generation. And the story of how it all began with a scarred woman and the cowboy who loved her is told and retold, a founding myth that shapes the family's identity. In the house, there is a portrait of Jack and Sarah, painted when they were in their 40s, happy and prosperous and deeply in love. In the portrait, Sarah is wearing a dress with a lower back and the edge of her scars is just visible. Jack's hand rests on her shoulder, protective and proud. They are looking at each other rather than the painter, and the love in their eyes is so evident that it moves people to tears even now, more than a century later. Below the portrait is a plaque with words taken from Sarah's diary, words she wrote on their 20th anniversary. I once believed my scars made me ugly, made me unworthy of love. Jack showed me a different truth. My scars are proof that I survived, that I fought, that I refused to give up. And Jack's love taught me that beauty is not about perfection. It is about authenticity, about living fully despite our wounds. He kissed my scars and called me beautiful, and in doing so, he gave me back my life. Those words sum up not just Sarah's journey, but the essence of what true love really is. It is not loving someone despite their flaws and wounds, but because of them, seeing them as integral parts of the whole person. It is having the courage to be vulnerable, to show your scars both physical and emotional, and trusting that the other person will handle them with care. It is choosing, every single day, to see the beauty in your partner, to honor their strength, to build a life together based on mutual respect and deep affection. Jack and Sarah Thornton's story became legendary in Colorado, told around campfires and dinner tables, written about in local histories and family trees. It became a symbol of the Wild West era, of the strength required to survive in that harsh land, and of the redemptive power of love. Schools were named after them, scholarships established in their honor, and their ranch became a historical landmark. But beyond the legend, beyond the romanticization and the mythology, was a simple truth. Two people found each other in a difficult time and place. They chose to build something together, to face their fears and wounds and move forward anyway. They worked hard, loved deeply, and created a legacy that lasted long after they were gone. They were not perfect, had struggles and arguments and difficult times like any couple. But they were committed to each other, to their family, to the life they were building. And it all started with one moment of vulnerability, one woman brave enough to show her scars, and one man wise enough to see them not as damage but as evidence of a survivor. It started with Jack turning Sarah back toward him when she wanted to hide, and kissing each scar with reverence and love. That single act changed everything, opened a door to healing and happiness that transformed both their lives in the end. That is what their story teaches. That we are all scarred in some way, marked by loss and pain and the harsh realities of life. That hiding those scars only gives them power over us, keeps us isolated and afraid. But when we find the courage to show our scars to someone we trust, and when that person responds with love rather than judgment, healing becomes possible. Not the healing that erases the scars, but the kind that transforms them from sources of shame into badges of honor. Jack and Sarah Thornton lived that truth, embodied it in everything they did. And their descendants, generation after generation, carry that truth forward. They tell the story, tend the graves, run the ranch, and remember the lesson. That love is not about perfection, it is about acceptance. It is about seeing someone fully, scars and all, and choosing them anyway. choosing them not despite their wounds but with full knowledge and appreciation of everything they have survived. The sun sets over the Rising Sun Ranch as it has for more than a century, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The aspen trees rustle in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the valley, horses whinny and cattle low. It is peaceful here, beautiful in a way that only a well-loved place can be. And in the meadow on the hill, 2 aspen trees stand guard over 2 graves, their roots intertwined beneath the earth, inseparable even in death as they were in life. This is where the story ends and begins, in this place of beauty and memory, of love that transcended time and circumstance. Jack and Sarah Thornton are gone, but their legacy remains, written in the land they improved, the children they raised, the love they shared. And anyone who visits the Rising Sun Ranch can feel it, that sense of something special, something rare and precious. The sense of a love story that was not easy or simple, but was profoundly real and deeply true. "My scars make me ugly," she said, turning away in shame and fear. But he turned her back and kissed each one, showing her a different truth. A truth about beauty and strength, about survival and love, about the courage it takes to be vulnerable and the grace it takes to receive that vulnerability with honor. That truth echoed through their lives, through their children's lives, through generations of their family. And it echoes still, in the wind through the aspen trees, in the stories told around the dinner table, in the portrait hanging in the house they built together. They lived, they loved, they built something lasting and good, and in the end, that is all any of us can hope for. To find someone who sees us clearly, who loves us fully, who helps us transform our scars from sources of shame into marks of strength. Jack and Sarah found that in each other, and the world is richer for it. Their story is a gift, a reminder of what is possible when we choose love over fear, acceptance over judgment, vulnerability over protection. The Wild West was a hard place, unforgiving and dangerous. But it was also a place of possibility, where people could reinvent themselves, where second chances were possible, where love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. Jack and Sarah embodied that spirit, that determination to build something beautiful from the raw materials of loss and pain. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, creating not just a ranch and a family, but a legacy of love that continues to inspire. And so the story of the scarred woman and the cowboy who loved her is complete. It is a story of the Wild West, of 1876 to 1933, spanning the transformation of a territory into a state, of a rough frontier into a settled land. But more than that, it is a timeless story of love's power to heal, to transform, to redeem. It is a story that will be told as long as there are people who need to hear that their scars do not define them, that they are worthy of love, that beauty is so much more than surface perfection. Jack and Sarah Thornton lived that truth, and in living it, they gave the world a gift. The gift of their story, their example, their unwavering commitment to seeing the beauty in each other. They rest now in their meadow, under the aspen trees, together in death as they were in life. And their love story lives on, a beacon of hope in a world that still needs reminding that we are all scarred, all wounded, all struggling. And that we are all, every single one of us, worthy of a love that sees past those scars to the strength and beauty beneath. This is the story of Sarah and Jack Thornton. This is the story of the Rising Sun Ranch. This is the story of the Wild West and the people who tamed it, not with violence, but with love and determination and unwavering hope. This is a story that ends happily, with 2 lives well lived, 2 hearts joined forever, and a legacy that will endure as long as the mountains stand and the aspen trees turn gold in the fall.